Okay, let's go move some animals. Come on. Yep. Come on. Come on, boys, we got company. Make me look good. Yep. Come on, guys. Get on up.
You just fill this with an excavator?
Excavator with a tilt bucket. Yep.
And so how do you anticipate maintaining this? Just mowing it with a flail mower, like a small flail mower or something?
Well, basically, we're at this point we're letting the animals maintain this section.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It's a little tricky, the tops of the berms. Right now, we're having to. We can let the animals on here to a degree, but if you're going to set up a fence, you know, it has to be clear enough so the fence can run without getting grounded out. And then the tops, you know, we weed eated this last week. We did it once this year, which it could have used more, but we still have a nice stand of clover underneath it. The best way to maintain the trees are wood chips. Wood chip rings around it.
It holds a lot of water down on there, right?
Yeah, and then
They fall apart.
the mycelium gets in it. So it's packed full of fungi.
You should inoculate the field with good soil. There,
But this good soil.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
we should add something to it and stir it up and spray it out.
Yeah.
This afternoon. No.
Well, they're happy in that new paddock, though, huh?
They are. That was a pretty typical move. They were a little slower. And again, where they were, this was a big break. You know, so that, you know, this space for that amount of animals,
Right.
where they were, you know, that isn't high density grazing. I put them in there 9:30 this morning.
Oh, really?
9:30,
So they're just in
10
here
o'clock.
today.
Yeah, they were just in here today. We can look over there toward the end where they were in a much smaller area for that amount of time. What'll be interesting is tomorrow morning to look at this area, and it might be worth us just strolling down here and checking this out. These are all tools. You know, the reason I didn't really mash them up in here is because there isn't a whole lot of great stuff on this side of the field. There's almost another, like over there, we looked at the line. You can kind of see it here. Look at the, well, just look at the height. I mean, look how tall the grass is over there.
Right.
Look how tall it is kind of down here in the middle. You know, it's much more fertile over here than it is here. So I just wanted to move them through because I want to get it mowed and I want to get on with my week and I want to get it planted, and I wanted you guys to see them go into some good stuff, and I just kind of wanted to get on with it. And I want to get it planted because it's not necessarily getting late, but again, working backwards, in order for me to be able to transition to 2019's warm season cover crop, I want to make sure that I get as much as I can out of this year's cool season cover crop, which means I want to get it in the ground as soon as possible.
Yeah, if you don't get your cool season cover crop in soon, also, you just, like Rocco said, you don't get a whole lot of growth, and then you get the native grasses and weeds and things that can take over. And by next year, your cover crop could be really small and makes it hard to crimp. It could still be in the vegetative state, so it's harder to crimp. Or you can still crimp it, but it's not effective. It'll bounce back.
Yeah, absolutely.
It'll keep growing.
Absolutely. Cover crop's got a lot of timing stuff to it. And, I've planted cover crop in December, and it's always worth planting the seed and getting it out there. If you can get your cover crop germinated up and established before hard cold, you get an incredible jump on spring. It's the same thing with stockpile. If I graze it down to the ground in the winter, say I graze you down to the ground in winter, and this over here, say it just kind of sits there and it turns brown, it kind of oxidizes, it kind of does its thing in the winter. But I don't touch it, I don't mess with it. Next spring, I'd said over there, well, we're getting in last week of March, first week of April. The stuff that I haven't gotten into recovers so much faster, 2 to 3 weeks faster than the stuff that we fooled with and messed with in the winter. So what I'm saying is that if we get it in and established early enough, there'll be enough of a jump in spring where it can spring forward with everything else that it can make a pretty remarkable difference. A 2 to 3 week jump in spring for us is huge.
Yeah. If you guys don't have a, most people don't have a seed drill, but with the animals, you can broadcast out the seed and they'll trample it in.
You absolutely can. If you don't have a drill or you can do that. I'd recommend maybe using about twice as much seed, which is what they recommend anyway for when you're broadcasting seed. They'll help you trample it in.
So you'd do that before you took them off even?
I do it before I put them in. Like if we just broadcast all that and now they're all in there and then we're going to get them out in 12, 24 hours, they'll really...
I do the pigs and the poultry and everything together, so I haven't done it with the chickens and everything in there. I was afraid they eat a ton of it, but I guess you said just put more in and let them...
Great question. That's why the pigs and chickens won't come over here, because I don't want them fooling with, especially the pigs, because I don't want them to fool with the cover crop seeds. I would not recommend putting chickens in when you've broadcast seeds that you want to germinate. You can do it after it's already germinated. The point I'm getting at is that I think the chickens will eat your seeds.
Yeah.
But if you get them in there at some point in your season, that's great.
Yeah, it's an interesting piece of land because it's a nice size. It's a great place to demonstrate. It's 3.5 acres here. And it's really cool because it's south slope here. So it's like ideal slope. And really what I think the future is, with the climate being unknown, but we're going to have really potential hot, dry periods. And having more water catchment in here, we've seen, well, I don't want to speak for you, Rocco, but all the fields are wetter. I don't know if you would agree or not, but it seems like there's more moisture in the fields. It's holding more moisture.
Yeah, because it stays here.
Yeah, it stays here. Yeah,
because it stays here. This is wetter because of this than it used to be, because this is here and it's keeping the water here. Absolutely.
Yeah, and now we have trees planted. These are 1-year-old apple trees. The vision for this is these trees are going to grow up, kind of take over this area, and we're going to keep mulching. We're going to keep doing these mulch rings, and we're basically going to smother out the grasses in here at some point. We're going to add more trees, keep plugging in all this. So you can imagine in, maybe 10 years, these trees being 20 foot tall, shading this area. We still got alley crop room here, a lot of sun that will go over it, but a lot more moisture. So we're going to be continually having more moisture in here. which I think is really important. We'll get more growth with the moisture, and I think it's going to be a neat kind of demonstration site.
It's so exciting too, because now we're getting this kind of vertical production. What I'm calling vertical production, because coming from more of a pasture kind of background, because these amount of trees, they're not going to affect the grass. Not a row of them. They aren't. It's not going to, take away the sunlight. If you have to get in a forest for that to happen. So now we're getting, that amount of production that's stimulating and good for all of us too. Because there'll inevitably be apples that fall on the ground that the animals will eat, or this tree got too big, let's snap this twig, give it to them, and just that relationship and that incorporation of these two systems be cool.
So how did you decide the contour for this berm in these 3 berms? Because I noticed, it's not straight, it goes...
Well, it's level though, so
it follows the lay of the land?
It follows the contour of the land.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's totally level. Water is very specific. It's got to be level, or it's just gonna run off, and then that's more of a ditch. And then nature, Mother Nature here always has curves. So in the center, it kind of comes to a V, and that's the valley. So there's a valley, and it's kind of hard to see now, but there's a distinct valley that runs down the center of this piece of land that heads right towards the pond over there.
You're absolutely right.
If you're going to contour valley to make that level, you've got to come up the valley to make that the same grade. So it's just the natural gradient of the land kind of dictated. And then it's handy. It's just in 3 paddock areas. It's kind of a nice layout. I think potentially we could have eliminated maybe one of the berms, but we wanted more production, more of the vertical production, like Rocco was saying. The potential to have hazelnuts down the center here is kind of exciting. And look at these guys. Yeah, they're having a heyday.
That's music to our ears, That's what we like to.
So you would have typically left them in here in this area a little bit longer, or would that about the time to take them out of this?
Possibly. I mean, you could have moved them tomorrow morning sometime, and they would have, it would have had a similar effect.
So you said they're on pasture, you shoot for 300 days a year. The other days, are they in a barn or some kind of paddock somewhere else and eating hay? Is that what?
That's what I was talking about, but we're definitely still moving them. And the reason the pigs aren't with the chickens across the street is because I'm weaning them. And when they're too close to mom, they just run back. So I had to put them on the other side of the farm. Long story short, it's the same thing. They're not going to stay there, and they're not going to stay in one spot as far as a barn feeding, because then I get a concentration of manure and mineral and elements there, and carbon with leftover hay. And then I got to go clean it, and not being lazy, but again thinking of the big picture. And then I'm burning diesel to go do that, sweep, muck it out with the tractor. I'll do the same thing. What I'll do in winter when I'm bale feeding is take them to spots that are were very weedy the growing season, or that I was unimpressed with, or that are just basically lacking in fertility, and I'll bale graze in those areas, and I'll keep them moving. Now, I don't have to do it every 3 days or every 12 hours. I might leave them in one of my zones. I might leave them in there for a week or 5 days or 10 days. There's some steep hills, which have been a challenge for me on the farm, because it's real hard to build fertility there, and it's real hard to get good pasture there, and they look like that when we got here, and now they're transitioning, but they're still pretty brambly, your goats love them kind of deal. But we're seeing more grasses grow there. We're seeing more life getting there as well. But I tend to focus on those areas when I do feed hay. to build carbon there and all that leftover stuff.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. That was a pretty good move. That was a pretty typical move. The sheep are super skittish, but if you ever do something like this, get used to dealing with 3 different personalities in one time too, because that's also a lot of what's happening. Like, you know, the donkeys are like, ugh, ugh. I'm up here on my berm. What do you want? You know, and the cows are like, oh, what's happening? Oh, you know, I had to go get the cows. And the sheep are super skittish, man. It breaks my heart. I mean, some of these sheep are still the original animals that we first had here, and they still act like I'm the Terminator every time I come in. I've done all the tricks in the book, and none of them work. You know, other than the hand feeding the apples, I haven't done that yet. But anyway, on kind of a serious note, if you guys ever do get into moving animals and its different species, just keep that in mind, man. Like, they'll get out and the other ones will move and the other ones won't move for anything. I'm just saying, keep in mind, you develop this eye and this ear for like, okay, the sheep are going, but I got to get over here, and a good sense for movement and the fear of, you know, the flight zone and stuff that y'all probably already know.
So what's the prognosis for this patch that was row crops, and now you're bringing it back? I mean, what's the period of time involved here with all this that you're doing? And you put some biochar on it, I guess, right?
They got a little bit of compost last fall, that had biochar in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're talking 3 years, 5 years until it looks like the other patches.
It's potential. Take that long. I mean, it really is timing. This year, like Rocco was saying, the summer cover crops got put in late. You know, last year you saw the slides.
That picture was right there.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
10-foot tall cover crop.
Right.
You know, but then if you miss your timing one time, then your
It's
cover
fine.
crops, you know, over there they look really nice. Most of this look more like this section over here. You know, not as dense, shorter.
Right.
So, you know, cover crops suppress weeds and they're building carbon. So, long story short, it's just, who knows?
The whole let it work thing, I found 3 years, you know, maybe let's call it 30 months,
Right.
to where I know it's getting better, or it's getting worse, or I can't tell you.
That looks great over there. You got clover in there. I mean, you got a lot of diversity. I mean, for a pasture.
Yeah.
You know.
You know, and that, you know, again, diversity as an indicator, and that cover crop, I mean, there's plenty of fertility here in this field and in this soil. It's just a matter of making the biology more active and unlocking it so it can become more available. The worst thing we could do at this point in this field, I think, is work it. You know, which is why we're doing the no-till drill and whatnot. And your soils can handle acute tillage. You know, if you got to get in there and work them, and it's hard to do no-till, especially in vegetable production. It's hard. It's really difficult. If you're doing it twice a year, that's a big difference. And if you're doing it once every 4 years,
Right.
it's a huge difference. It's acute tillage versus chronic tillage. And this has had a little bit of both. So we just want to stay off it for the next bit and keep grazing it, keep growing our cover crops, and see what comes of it.
What's your thoughts on like the subsoiling, you know, subsoiling techniques where it's harder? I mean, this wasn't too hard, but we got some areas that's really compacted.
The straight answer to that question is, my thoughts are that I have to do it and see for myself. I've never done it. I've heard probably what you've heard. You know, I've heard, okay, great, all you did was you moved your hard pan from 12 inches to 24 inches. You know, and I've heard, oh, it loosens it up, and there's some, I mean, doesn't Jeff Poppins do that, like strategically?
He uses the chisel plow, but we have a keyline plow on the farm. It lifts. It's pulling and lifting, and it doesn't mix the horizons of the soil. So there's a lot of potential in that, but it's, there again, it's timing thing. If you come in, the soil's wet right now, if you were to try to subsoil this, you know, basically it's just going to squeeze back together. So it's a timing thing, and then you need to drill it right after so you get something to take that space and kind of keep it open. I think there's a lot of potential in that, but
areas where you have we got a lot of runoff in certain areas, you know, where it's just kind of high levels of drop, or trying to get something down into the ground, moisture-wise. That could be something that might work.
oh, it could work really well. But it's
But you got
there's basically it seems like there's one time a year that you can do it from what I've seen. Late spring is too early; it's still too wet. It's basically midsummer that it's going to dry out enough, and it really depends on soil too. Clay is going to hold the water and squeeze back together, where some other soils won't necessarily do that. You know, if it's a sandier soil, you guys have what, more of a sandy loam
It's
there?
pretty clay.
Pretty clay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you'd have to shoot for a dry period.
Yeah.
So like you compacting in the spring, things like oilseed radish.
Yeah, you would seed oil seed radish right now. Yep.
Tried like some daikon stuff.
Yeah, that's what
But it's
what he's talking about.
It won't, like, a lot of it just washed away, even trying to put stuff on top. So I need something to, like, get it down in the ground.
Get it down in there. Yeah, you need it drilled.
Yeah.
And you maybe, you know, the nice thing about a drill is a lot of farmers have that nowadays.
Yeah.
So you can get somebody to come in pretty reasonably and drill that for you. But the oilseed radish can get 2 feet deep in the ground. And you seed it this time of year, it dies over winter and starts rotting out. So in spring, you basically have a hole that goes down that far. And it's kind of cool. Like if you drill in spring, the drill goes over that oilseed radish, and what's left, you'll see plants popping out of the radish, germinating out of the radish. And then they just fill that spot. A lot of potential.
Yeah, you can broad fork too to help stuff.
Yeah, broad forking. But yeah, just staying off of it, not driving on it, and basically giving it time. Like if we could keep piling up cover crops on this, then the earthworms are going to get in there, you know, and they're going to start working the soil. And they're going to be pulling nutrients down. And I mean, it's funny, you'll see, I don't know if you guys have ever observed this, but earthworms rolling up leaves and pulling them down into their holes. Have you seen that?
No.
Yeah, look for that in the fall. Yeah, oak leaves.
Huh.
Yep. Somehow they roll them up, and you'll just see this leaf that's rolled up like dancing.
And what do they do that for?
They're bringing it down, and they're basically, I think they're probably ingesting some of it. And
It's interesting.
yeah, it's kind of a cool phenomena.
What size charger would you have on all this fence here?
We got 2.5 miles of 12.5 gauge wire, 5-wire fence, like they do perimeter. That's 2.5 miles, and then that would take like a 3 joule charger roughly. And they say, and this is all pretty conservative to make sure you got a lot of juice. And then each net fence is 164 feet long, and that takes about 1/4 of a joule. So I don't know how many net fences you're running here. It's a lot. I run maybe 6 at a time, 3 herds of animals going through paddocks. And so I have a 6 joule solar charger. That's the biggest solar one I could get. It's got goats need 6,000 volts minimum to keep them in. And I think other animals a lot less, but the goats, you know, it gets down to 4,000 or 3,000. The babies are getting out. Everybody's going where they want, you know.
Yeah, and the sheep have, you know, obviously they have wool, which is insulated.
Right.
So they're able to break through. Well, what size charger do you have, Russell?
I think we've got a 6 joule. We had the biggest one that we could get. It got fried in a lightning storm, and I kind of don't want to talk about that. And
Because they're expensive, probably.
they are expensive. I think it depends a lot on what you're running, and I think you're absolutely right. Goats and sheep, you know, sheep are relatively light compared to a lot of the other farm animals, and they've got super light on their feet as well and agile, and you know they've got wool. At least half the year they got a big wool coat on, so you need a bunch of juice to keep them in. You know, a pig, you see one strand can be fine for pigs. They get that nose on it, and they're so dense and heavy, it just gets them in cattle too. So, were you asking about how big of a charger to get?
Yeah, I mean, we have a few chargers. I'm just finding a solar one. It's like, that seems like the biggest one I can find was 2 joule. Just try to get a bigger charger for solar.
I use Ken Cove. I've used them for years. They can help you. Just call them up and tell them what you want.
Yeah, King Cove's good. Get the biggest one that you are willing to afford. It's about the only thing I'll say that about, but it's true.
All right. That was fun.
Good stuff.
That was fun. Thank you all. Thanks, guys.